Our next panel is Cloud Applications Platforms for Healthcare. I'll bring up Kaz Sapanov, the Senior Vice President and CTO of CloudCore, who is the moderator, to introduce the rest of his panel. Kaz?
Thank you. You guys want to come on stage? Hi everyone, I'm Kazit Sapinov, Senior VP of and CTO of CloudCore, moderating this session today. So thank you for joining this session, and we are going to discuss cloud computing application platform in healthcare today, which is bringing lots of efficiency to many industries. And today we are going to discuss specifically healthcare. So I'm joined today by Hector Rodriguez, CTO and Industry Technology Strategies for Healthcare Industry Group at Microsoft. Glenn Kate, former SVP of Optum Health Cloud. Who is next? Matt. Okay, Matt Cheevers, Director Worldwide Alliances and Channels for Oracle, sitting for Larry Ellison. And Chris Daly, Head of Research for Big Health. Thanks. So let's get started. So let's step back a little bit and see what is PaaS. So PaaS is one of service models, as you know, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So basically, PaaS allows you to deploy some applications, acquired or developed in-house, using some programming services, programming languages, services, or tools, without taking care of, the bottom layer, like infrastructure. So the first question would be, how PaaS for healthcare is different for generic PaaS? So what's the differentiator? So anyone can tackle this question?
I'd be happy to jump in on that one.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know me, most of my work's been done in the provider realm, and I focus a lot on how to differentiate yourself in the coming accountable care organization realm. So platform as a service, it's like a Matryoshka doll, right? If you've mastered your infrastructure, you could dynamically provision network, storage, compute, mobility, security. Then you can dynamically provision your middleware, whether that be databases or LDAP servers or things that are necessary, not specifically for the software as a service layer, but one layer down. And then, of course, the doll above that is your software as a service, and above that you get to business services, business process as a service, a lot of think tanks like to call it. Differentiator here really is constraints around the data. Healthcare delivery organizations like to own their data, like we all like to own cars. We don't like to use municipal transportation in a lot of areas of the country, right? So the differentiator is, it's very difficult because the data gravity problem to start dynamically provisioning your middleware when your data needs to stay locked in where you are in a private cloud scenario. As the keynote mentioned, there's a bunch of products out there on the Chapel, the CHPL, Certified Healthcare Product List, that will allow you to attest for meaningful use. And you will notice some big names are missing from it. And the reason is they're not willing to sign that BAA, and that's a huge constraint. So you want to go Salesforce? Can't. They're not going to sign the BAA. You want to go Google Compute? They're not there. Can't do it. And Salesforce has publicly come out and said they will not do a private cloud solution. You're not going to get Salesforce in a box. So you need to start thinking creatively, and you need to master the VM affinity as well as the data gravity problem.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I'd just like to add the difference when you enter healthcare into platform as a service, differentiating it from the general industry. In most cases in general industry, all of the data that you need can be housed within that one platform. In healthcare, it's very different. When you're talking about, the sickest patients, they tend to have 5 or 10 specialists. Their data is spread all over the country. You're not going to necessarily have all of that data access in one place. So you need a platform and an ability to go get that data in various places.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else?
I might just build from some of those comments. Hopefully I'm coming through here. Just building from some of those prior comments, maybe more from the perspective of a solution provider or an application provider to the healthcare vertical. What we stress to those sorts of providers is that if, for example, you're considering PaaS or any other sort of cloud-based delivery model, you need to recognize that if it's, for example, meeting regulatory compliance standards, securing data, making service level commitments to your end users and to the provider community, that ultimately those are defined on a composite basis, right? So you have to recognize what are the constituent pieces of the solution that I'm delivering, right? Mm-hmm. Data's in different systems, platform technologies and infrastructure may be provided by different vendors. Service providers and in fact, data centers, physical points of presence need to be certified against different regulatory standards. So I think taking a more holistic or composite view of these things is really important in the space.
Okay, so next question is, when should we use cloud platforms and when we should not?
Well, I'll start with that one. I do want to back it up a little bit. I'd say make your cloud vendors work for you, and by that I mean make sure they understand what challenges healthcare. So the basic triple aim, lowering cost. If it's not lowering costs for you, probably not worth looking at it. Better patient experience, and also managing population health, so access to healthcare. Those are 3 key components of triple aim. At Microsoft, this is what we stress on our team. If it's not doing those things for healthcare, we've got to do something different. And the cloud has proven that. Berkeley Computer Science Center has proven that infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, can lower your IT costs, your infrastructure costs, by up to 87%. That's a huge win, reason why you should look at the cloud. But you still need to make sure it's going to work for you. Bain & Company last year published their report that PaaS, when you use PaaS environments, they've proven you can reduce costs by 30 to 50%. Those are huge dollars for healthcare. That means those dollars can now go to real care. And if you're a health plan, you're worried about medical loss ratio. If you're a provider, you're worried about new reimbursements. And also you're worried about launching new care models, accountable care organizations, patient-centered medical homes. That speed to market is what the cloud enables. So those are the things you're looking for. It doesn't meet your requirements. But I want to stress something that I think the whole panel is talking about is make sure your vendor is ready, not just with the business associate agreement. We've done that for years. It was a lot of work to get a vendor to do that. I know that some of the cloud vendors still don't do it. But once you do that, make sure they operationalize it. Make sure they've given you back control. Biggest concern hospitals and health plans have about going to the cloud that I hear, we lose control. Guess what? You don't. You actually don't if your vendor gives you back the right tools for you to maintain control of that. And the reality is, as Gartner said, we're going to live in a hybrid world probably for the rest of our lives. We already do, and it's going to continue. So make sure it works for you on your terms and not on your vendor's terms. Make the vendor work for you.
I'd like to jump in there. Really well put, Hector. It's all about those SLAs. There is very little that you cannot do in a private or a public cloud, and you just have to master your SLAs. You have to turn your plumbers into litigators and start thinking. Seriously, plumbers, you just start thinking about those service contracts. If you have a good governance program where you can manage your service contracts, I'm going to give you a little bit of strategy here from an HDO perspective. Your core clinical application vendors are not developing cloud-aware software. Okay? You're not going to go to Epic. You're not going to go to Cerner. You're not going to go to Meditech. You're not going to go to Allscripts. You're not going to find an acute or an ambulatory EHR, at least a major one, that is what we would call cloud-aware from the perspective that it's elastic. They still require you to buy into Big Iron or to go through the managed service where you're paying someone else. It's not really cloud. We've had managed services for over a decade. That's not cloud. When it comes to PaaS, a great place to use it is a strategy, is to differentiate yourself from all of the other ACOs that are coming out in the world today. As you look at your core clinical applications, you will discover that the most valuable real estate that you have, or at least some of the most valuable real estate that you have, is the intersection between user experience and the PHI. when the patient interacts with it, when the physician interacts with it. This is real estate above your core clinical application that you could control by creating a longitudinal record. There's a multitude of ways to do that, and you can use cloud technology to do that. So you look at your core clinical application, you look at what you're using for, and you start breaking away pieces of the core clinical application to differentiate yourself from the other ACOs out there. It can be done. It's a very interesting way to apply platform as a service for healthcare. And first and foremost, though, like Hector said, the service contracts are paramount to being successful in that strategy.
Thank you, Chris. So the next question is about acceptance and adoption. So could you tell me what are typical inhibitors and drivers for cloud platforms in healthcare?
I'll start with the simple answer. The driver is obviously costs. As data explodes and so on, the health systems are looking to lower their costs. The inhibitor is also just as obvious, it's risk. The CIOs are very risk averse, and so that is going to prevent them from doing something where they are potentially losing some control.
So cloud provides better security?
I suppose it depends who you ask, but in many cases, particularly in the smaller systems, I would say yes.
It could. I mean, we've seen it where the public cloud infrastructures at places like Microsoft and others are better than the security infrastructures. And you're absolutely right. At small hospitals, small health plans, it's been quite amazing to observe that.
Because, you know, we invited quite a lot of people to this conference, and one of the answer was there is no way our data goes to the cloud. It's, you know, I've heard this quite a lot, so basically.
So we all live in the cloud already. We've been there for years. The internet is a cloud, email, I mean, your children live in the cloud. They get content from the cloud every day. So I've heard that. I've heard that from CIOs for years, and it went, and we do a talk a little bit later, and I have a slide that started in about 2008, 2009 that said exactly that. I will never go to the cloud. Then what we've started to see are healthcare organizations, covered entities, selling their data centers and then leasing some space back and living in the hybrid world. And what we're hearing now is, I don't want a data center. I want to be as cloud first, and then on-prem is my second choice. So it's changing, but you're still going to have naysayers. So those responses you got, that's still some people believe that.
Okay.
Sorry, if I could just build very briefly on some of Hector's comments. I think this came through in some of the Gartner research that you cited as well. But you know, cloud isn't, nor should it be regarded as an all or nothing proposition. I mean, ultimately, you've got to be judicious about the specific solutions, the applications, and workloads that make sense to deploy there. And so, you know, where we spend a lot of time advising both end users as well as solution providers is around doing just that, working back from a set of use cases and business requirements and using that as the basis to discern what does the solution need to look like, where does it need to live, what's the right deployment model. So, yeah, I think you can take a more nuanced approach than simply say, or to pose the question in terms of, you know, on a binary basis, are you moving to the cloud or aren't you? I think it's probably somewhere in between there.
Okay, let me just jump in real quick. I have this great slide where I'm demonstrating the value of going to a kind of a colo scenario. And, excuse me. A healthcare system traditionally does not spend as much money building a data center because they're not in the data center business as someone like Microsoft or Facebook or Google. Or one recent example that I use, I show them a picture of SwitchNap. Armed guards, fully automatic rifles guarding the data center. And then I show them a picture of their broom closet where there's a switch kind of taped to the wall. And say, you are not investing in security or redundancy for HVAC or redundancy, you know, for the multitude of resources that are necessary, and they can give you a non-multi-tenant environment. Why are you in the data center business? And then the second part of the huge problem that I keep hearing, or that I've heard multiple times at healthcare systems, they're terrified of the word cloud. I mean, I had somebody walk in one time and say, guys, to my team, if somebody says cloud, you might get fired. You know, the healthcare system across the road, the healthcare system, they just bought into cloud. They fired half of their IT staff. We don't want to lose half of our IT staff, so don't say cloud, man. It's not true. It was a bad example. It's a mistake to go out buy into cloud and fire half of your staff. All right. There are actual studies around the number of employees that will not make the jump from racket stack to utility-based compute model, right? But it is not because they don't have the skills. You need the same skills. You just have to litigate instead of racket stack. You still need the same people. And the more that you encourage them to understand and get past that perception, that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the more success you'll have in healthcare.
Okay, thanks. So another question is, it's quite popular. As you know, there are several service deployment model, basically private, public, and hybrid. So which one is the right one? So how do you balance between over-provisioning infrastructure and under-subscribing?
I'll start. I don't think it's back to that point about being binary. It's not on or off, yes or no. It really is what works for you. What's the best combination? And again, I'm going to stick to that Gartner research and something that we've always said at Microsoft, and I've observed through the years when the cloud first started. It's going to be a hybrid world. And I agree, it doesn't reduce your staff. That's not the point, because you go in, particularly in hospitals, they're so understaffed in IT that team could be doing things that are more applicable to delivering a better patient experience in the hospital room throughout their patient journey. And if you really refocus those resources, you're going to do that. But the better model is, again, if you have to start somewhere, first of all, I would ask IT departments to start behaving like a private cloud organization. And that means stop being haphazard all over the place, adopt the concepts of highly virtualized environments. We see that in things like Epic implementations, because I agree, your EMR vendors are not thinking cloud yet. They're just not there. But it doesn't mean that you, as an IT organization, can't start to look at the cloud, the private cloud as a service, a highly virtualized, almost multi-tenant service in-house. Build those best practices and then start to look at what the hybrid cloud looks like. And use easy public cloud workloads such as email, storage, as was spoken about earlier in the keynote, those types of things. Something like SharePoint in the cloud. That's just an easy no-brainer. Again, but just make sure that the vendor you're working with is going to sign a BAA, because we have those issues now around, you've got, and if you work in a hospital or a health plan, check on this. You've got a lot of people using storage for documents in the cloud, and they're runaway sort of rogue users because they know how to do it. So they're putting data out in non-compliant cloud environments. And what you want to do is bring that under your control. But take baby steps, work with vendors who are there to work for you, and eventually you're going to end up, again, in a hybrid cloud.
Okay, so how would you handle unexpected spikes of activity, let's say epidemic spread of disease or some natural disaster? So you have like 2 million people coming into your healthcare organization, and you need to serve them. And your IT infrastructure will lag behind, right?
Well, interesting question. Cloud lends itself to agility across a multitude of layers. If you get your infrastructure in place and you get your platforms in place, this panel's talking about, you can have technical agility. If you get data virtualization, you get master data management, you get your master patient index in place, and you have data compatibility, you get data agility. If you're capable of provisioning business services with recipes, like I said, those Matryoshka dolls, right? Then you get business agility. And so if you do have a spike, a disease, and you're measuring it correctly using actual showback and chargeback models with your service contracts, you're measuring consumption, then you can actually press a button, fire off a trigger to activate a recipe, and launch a new clinic in a new community where they're experiencing a disaster and you need to set up emergency services. It can happen that fast. I think my healthcare system I'm primarily working with right now takes about 2 weeks to get the legal paperwork done, but about 4 months to provision everything to set up an office. That can happen in the 2 weeks if you have agility across those layers.
I would just ask the reverse question. How would you do that and handle that spike without a cloud if it's a single infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's the right way to look at it. Those are hard costs. We talk about that a lot, agility, the spikes, and again, the biggest thing that concerns particularly a hospital are hard costs. Forget the soft cost. That's a great marketing story. We all do it as vendors. But hard cost, what does it take to provision an environment where now you've got to recover from Katrina or Sandy? And I mean, these are realities. I had hospitals and health plans in New York City that no longer have a data center, recovering from Sandy, probably the biggest natural disaster that just occurred, power outages, and it's costing them millions of dollars that were unbudgeted, unplanned to recover from that. If they'd have been in the cloud, they'd have been able to do some of the things that Mark showed in the keynote, recover from the cloud, rebuild those instances in their backup centers, in their disaster recovery centers, and at least be at 50 or 60% productivity within hours. And just a statistic, you can go today to something like the Windows Azure portal, probably the Amazon one also. Within a couple of minutes, you can provision an environment. We do that all the time in demos, and it's quite amazing. And not just an environment of one server, you can actually launch, as again, as I've spoken about earlier, 4,000 servers. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Just one more comment. You had asked before, whether or not we're going to have a hybrid world and so on. I would also challenge that, does anyone not think that, say, 20 years from now, that in fact we will all be operating in the healthcare world in almost exclusively a public cloud environment, and the hybrid version of that would be perhaps custom applications that front ring that public cloud, but not a shared infrastructure like that. I think there will be a time, and it's not that far away, where people will look at it and say, how did people used to run this in their own data centers? It's just not possible.
I'd like to point out real quick, man, this is really good. Yeah, your Amazon services, we were talking earlier about how you need your service contracts. Put this right up front, okay? When you read in the New York Times, you're reading the news, the news that Amazon went down. Oh my gosh, the sky's falling, and Netflix was offline for 2 hours. I got news for you. You could set up your services to be resilient, fully redundant in the cloud. That is not data centers go down. There's natural disasters. This happens. If you didn't distribute, your services to another service region, right? You wanted to save them money, or you just didn't have the know-how, the knowledge of how to set up a fault-tolerant service. That's poor architecture. You pay for good architecture now, or you will pay for it later, right? It's just service contracts.
Thanks. So let's talk about being compliant, and let's talk about standards and regulations. So agility is good, cost saving is good. So how do you stay compliant? Because there is a soup of different standards like HIPAA and you know what. So anyone?
I'd be happy to.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much. Sorry.
Okay.
I got a lot to say on this topic, so I'm going to try to keep it short because I just went through ONC certification for our product line. Standards from a healthcare perspective. If you have lots of hospitals and you have lots of clinics, you have lots of software, whether or not you know it. It's like Gulliver's Travel. Okay, you're tied down by all these little strings. ICD-10 comes along. Let me just give you this one simple example. ICD-10 comes along and says, everyone needs to use ICD-10, but you have 5 applications to do the same thing in radiology. You have 10 applications to do the same thing in ER, and then go across your care delivery organizations, right? You get pharmacy, and you got lab, you got the ER, oncology, radiology, all these different branches. And because you have multiple hospitals, they're like a federated group of hospitals, and this happens even in the most standardized of hospitals, by the way. You now have to manage the upstream, downstream connections for every one of those applications as you upgrade to ICD-10. Each one of those is a string tying you down. You cannot move. You've lost your agility. Standardization is part of a necessary, painful process for healthcare systems to go through if they want the agility, so that instead of it taking 18 months to achieve ICD-10, you could do it in 6. And it is simply a numbers game. Instead of having 5 applications, you're managing all the upstream and downstream over to 12 applications over here. How about 2? It happens a lot faster, and you achieve your compliance a lot faster. So that's interesting stuff.
Yeah, just to build from that comment as well. So I suppose simultaneously one of the opportunities and the challenges that cloud presents is that there is a window of opportunity when you're considering cloud-based delivery models to standardize your platform architecture, right? But that may be very challenging in the interim as you're evolving to those standards. But it's something we see, again, as we spend a lot of time in my business in particular, working with application providers, working with solution providers who may have a portfolio of applications that today they offer to the healthcare space. As they look to deliver certain of those applications in the cloud, they recognize that one of the things they're doing by definition is they are going to standardize on a platform architecture and on whatever underlying infrastructure their service provider may be offering. That in some cases requires some amount of work that needs to be done to those applications to evolve those architectures. So while in the near term there are some adjustments, some related costs, what we find is that downstream there are huge benefits in terms of actually designing compliance into those architectures. So I think there's a great opportunity there.
I could completely agree. Make sure your vendor is by design building in the compliance capabilities. But what I will also say is you've got business standards and you've got technical standards. So you've got the HIPAA technical, administrative, and physical safeguards. You want to make sure your vendors are following that. But then you've got standards around messaging, such as HL7 or the X12. I mean, look at what's happening today with the health insurance exchanges and the enrollment transactions and the payment transactions. They've changed the standard again. You need to make sure your vendors are keeping up with those, particularly in platform as a service. In infrastructure as a service, you're a bit more in control, and even in SaaS, you want to make sure your SaaS vendor is also keeping up. If your vendor can't explain to you how they keep up with the changes in HL7, in X12, in DICOM, in those types of industry standards that are about the messaging, the integration, the interoperability, what they're really telling you, it's going to be on you, and it is going to be a little bit more difficult when they put that integration burden back on you. And I'll tell you, as a vendor, it's not easy. At Microsoft, and I know having worked with other vendors, it's not easy to keep up. We get the information just as late as you guys do who are in the IT organizations for covered entities, but that vendor has to keep up. They should have those built in by design. I love that phrase, and that's what you're looking for, and that's the question that you should be asking your cloud vendors.
Thanks, Hector. So we have some time for questions from audience. 2 questions. Anyone? Okay, I think it's all clear, right?
You got them all. You covered it.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm sorry. Could you please repeat I was writing down your 3. Sorry, you mentioned the 3 things that the cloud provider must provide us. I didn't get the third one. I'm so sorry. You said the lower the costs, better patient experience, and what was the third?
And those are the triple aim caveats. So it's lowering cost, improving the patient experience, and really giving better access to care. So enabling new access models, such as accountable care organizations, patient-centered medical homes are good examples of that.
Thank you.
Okay. Here's the mic.
It doesn't have any.
It would sit in your data center. And today private cloud, I'm going to put quotes around that, are being delivered as appliances. Appliances are back in, so you'll see vendors just wheel in hardware appliances that they call private clouds. But what that means is it's a highly virtualized environment where you can run your services. But it also means it's ready to talk to the public cloud also, which is what you should be looking for.
What do you recommend as for a strategy for going to hybrid or private connected to the
I would start
public?
with if you're really at the beginning of it, a couple of things. I would start with a private cloud environment, so I would probably look at an appliance. All your hardware vendors do really good jobs with them nowadays. They start with small ones, which could be 10 terabytes up to hundreds of terabytes, depending on what type of project you're trying to do. And then I would look at the easy workloads in the public cloud, and I would start probably with email or even websites, collaborative type of environments. And that's why you see why Amazon Web Services took off. It was about the websites. So they started with an easy workload and kind of own that space. But again, in healthcare, you got to worry about who's going to sign those agreements with you. But start with those 2 things.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to jump in at the end there real quick. Just say, I agree completely. Also think about a cloud maturity model. If you're starting out, build just a little roadmap, put it on a napkin. Whiteboard's even better. Right? DevOps or development, if you're working with de-identified data, and I know there's a lot of healthcare systems that tell me, oh, we don't want to be a development shop. You have to go no further than their interface engine to find 20 developers. Okay, they already are. You could take development, and that is a proven, time-tested, easily done, well-understood process of getting your, jumping into the cloud pool where it's shallow.
Thank you. Oh, okay, another one. The last one.
Is the model for hybrid storage, as you described in the previous talk described, an alternative to, complementary to, a component of the use for vendor-neutral archives as a secondary storage for medical imaging?
I've worked with this direct. Have you guys worked with this?
Our model, and I want to say, our model is complementary because I do see it in the Microsoft brochures and offerings. It's a very complementary model, and it's actually an area that's growing. But go ahead, Chris, you have more.
I did an analysis on vendor-neutral archives. Basically, the ability to store your packs, your images, and then use a universal viewer to look at them, and then integrate that data with the longitudinal record, right? It's kind of like a Rube Goldberg machine at the end of the day, but the idea here is you don't need to go to a proprietary viewer to view it. It's a very powerful play for cloud technology. We're seeing success. I'm not going to list the vendors, but some of them are here today.
Okay. I think this concludes the session. So we've spoken about cloud healing today. So thank you, everyone.